There was a time I thought I understood myself. Not in the grand, soul-shaking way people speak of after an awakening, but in the quiet, habitual way of someone who had checked every box. I had a job that paid well, a resume with enough milestones to make my family proud. My days flowed in a rhythm that felt acceptable, predictable. There were no major failures, no crisis waiting at the door. Just life, functioning, performed well enough to pass. I had relationships, not deep, not raw, but sufficient. Enough to laugh at the right times, reply to texts, show up when needed. There were birthdays, holidays, group photos. I smiled in all of them. And if someone had asked me if I was okay, I would have said yes, because by all accounts, I was. But beneath that calm surface was something quietly absent. A kind of emptiness, not loud enough to alarm, just soft enough to ignore. And I mistook performance for presence. I confused routine with meaning, and in the name of being well-adjusted, I silenced the questions that whispered in the silence between tasks. I didn't stop to ask, who is the one living this life? Because everything appeared right. And when things look right from the outside, you're rarely encouraged to question what's going wrong inside. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't here. I was a character in a story someone else had written for me. A story with all the right plot points, but no soul behind the scenes. And yet, there was a flicker barely visible of something watching from within. Not judging, not shouting, just noticing. It waited. For a pause, for a fracture in the rhythm. Because all it takes is a single moment of silence to reveal how far you've drifted from yourself, while calling it stability. It didn't begin with a tragedy. No heartbreak, no loss, no unraveling of plans. Just an ordinary afternoon, the kind you forget as soon as it ends. I was sitting alone in a quiet room, where I often came to read, to breathe, to escape the noise of the world. But this time, the silence felt different, not peaceful, not heavy. Just hollow. Nothing had gone wrong. And maybe that's what made it so disorienting. In that stillness, without warning or invitation, a question surfaced, simple, soft, but heavier than anything I'd carried. Who am I? At first, I tried to brush it aside, as if it were a passing cloud of thought, a cliché from an old philosophy book. But it lingered, not loud, not urgent, just persistent. It didn't demand an answer. It simply refused to leave. I stared into the air in front of me, as if the space itself might offer clarity. But instead, I felt something inside begin to crack, not violently, but with the quiet certainty of a foundation shifting, a fracture in the architecture of who I thought I was. The job title, the memories, the relationships, the routines. Everything I'd used to define myself began to blur at the edges. Like layers of paint peeling from a wall, I saw the roles I had played start to dissolve. And beneath them nothing I could name. No clear identity waiting beneath the surface, only space, only silence. I wasn't falling apart. I was falling inward, into the question itself. And in that descent, I realized, this wasn't a crisis in the usual sense. It was a quiet undoing, a gentle death of certainty. And perhaps if I didn't resist it, a birth. And as I sat with the question, my reflection once solid began to fragment. In the days that followed, something began to unravel. Not loudly, not like a fire or a storm, but like threads slipping loose from a garment you've worn your entire life. The seams of who I thought I was began to fray. I started noticing how much of me was performance, how effortlessly I stepped into roles without realizing they were costumes. The responsible one, the polite one, the ambitious one, the emotionally stable one. They weren't lies, not exactly. They were expectations I had learned to meet, masks handed down by family, culture, the quiet pressure to be someone respectable. And I wore them so long I forgot I ever had a face beneath them. But now that the question, who am I, had carved its space inside me. The masks began to slip. And what terrified me most wasn't that I had worn them. It was that I didn't know how to live without them. Every compliment, every moment of approval, every nod of validation. I realized I had collected them like armor. To feel safe, to feel seen, but never truly felt. What I called me was often just a reaction, a carefully rehearsed answer to the world's unspoken script. And the deeper I looked, the more I saw that even my pain had been shaped to fit the narrative I thought others could understand. I wasn't lying. I was surviving, but I was also vanishing. Somewhere along the way, I had traded my presence for approval, traded my truth for the comfort of being accepted. And now, as the roles collapsed like empty stage sets, I was left in the center of the theater, with no script, no spotlight, and no idea who was behind the curtain. But maybe that, too, was a beginning. Once the roles began to fall, I did what most of us do when we feel lost. I searched. I turned to books first, stacked them beside my bed like quiet promises. Self-help, philosophy, spiritual texts, each one whispering, "Here, you might find yourself." And for a moment, I believed them. Their words gave me something to hold on to. Some temporary scaffolding to lean against, while the inner ground kept shifting. I repeated mantras. I highlighted quotes. I underlined anything that made the ache feel less vast. But beneath the calm of those pages, the question still pulsed: who is reading these words? So I asked people, friends, mentors, anyone who seemed to walk with more certainty than I did. Some said I was overthinking. Some told me to surrender. Others prescribed purpose, passion, productivity. I tried them all. I meditated. I made lists. I prayed even when I wasn't sure who I was praying to. I redefined myself again and again, hoping the right label would finally fit. But every answer I clung to began to crumble under the weight of a single quiet night. No philosophy, no affirmation, no belief, no matter how elegant, could fill the hollow space where the truth should live. Not truth as in theory, but truth as in felt knowing. The kind that doesn't explain, it simply is. What haunted me wasn't the lack of answers, but the gnawing sense that I was still asking the wrong question. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a wound to be sat with. A silence to enter, not escape. But I wasn't ready yet, so I kept running in circles that looked like progress. I wasn't seeking truth. I was trying to outrun the fear that maybe, beneath everything, there was no one there to be found. And when the question no longer stirred fear, but fatigue, I stopped. And still, the question waited, not louder, just deeper. At some point, I stopped trying. Not out of wisdom, not out of enlightenment, but because something inside me simply gave out. The searching wore thin. The answers, so carefully collected, began to feel like echoes in an empty hall. Every label I'd reached for had dissolved in my hands. Every identity I'd clung to faded like fog in morning light. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to become. And without even realizing it, I had arrived at a place I never meant to reach. The space beneath the story of me. No striving, no effort to appear whole. No one watching, not even myself, just a strange, quiet stillness. A vastness I had always feared, but now, somehow, it welcomed me. It wasn't peace, exactly, nor was it despair. It was the space between both, a hollow field where all the names I once answered to had fallen away. I was not my ambitions, not my past, not the pain I carried, not the image I tried to protect. Without them, I didn't feel enlightened. I felt exposed, weightless, unanchored. But there was no panic. Just breath, just being. Like a leaf that finally stops resisting the river. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't becoming anything. I was simply here, not as a role, not as a persona, but as something that sees. And that seeing, that wordless awareness, was enough. It didn't need to be understood. It didn't ask for a definition. It only asked that I stay. So I stayed, no longer chasing the self. No longer escaping it, just present, just this. And in the quiet collapse of everything I thought I was, something soft remained, not a person, not a name, but a presence too simple to describe, and too real to ignore. It didn't arrive like revelation, no lightning flash, no voice from above, just silence, not the silence of absence, but the silence that had always been there, beneath the noise of becoming, beneath the storm of identity. It didn't answer the question, who am I? It made the question irrelevant, because in that stillness, I saw that I had been looking for myself, as if I were an object to be located, a shape to be outlined. But what had been witnessing the search was never missing. There was no more I amness, or I am that, only a quiet awareness, clear and borderless, gently watching each sensation rise and fall, without grasping. It watched thoughts come and go, without calling them truth, watched feelings swell and fade, without becoming them. It did not try to define itself. It didn't need to. It had no image to protect, no destination to reach. It simply knew, and I began to understand, the one who had suffered, the one who had searched, the one who tried to make sense of the void, was just a story playing in the field of something vaster, not a person, not a mind, but a presence, softer, unmoving, undeniable. I had spent my life trying to become someone. Now I was simply being, not as a self, but as the space in which the self appeared and disappeared and appeared again. This wasn't an answer. It was the end of the need for one. And in that wordless knowing, I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel special. I felt free, not free to do anything, but free from the illusion that I had to be anything at all. Just this quiet, formless knowing, resting behind every breath, watching it all unfold, without ever needing to be involved. At some point, even the witness dissolved. There was no more observer, no more observed, just the movement of life, flowing through a body, through a breath, through the sound of wind against a window. No boundary remained between inside and out, no distance between thought and sky, between heartbeat and bird call. Everything was simply this, not mine, not other, just being. The question, who am I, faded like a dream at dawn, not because it was answered, but because it was no longer needed. The one who asked had melted into what is. There was no name for this space, no concept wide enough to hold it. It wasn't bliss, though it was gentle. It wasn't knowledge, though it was clear. It was freedom, not the freedom to choose, but the freedom from needing to choose. The freedom of no center, no edge, just presence. Silent, vast, undivided. There was no longer someone being alive. There was only aliveness itself. No effort to hold on, no fear of letting go. Only the effortless unfolding of what had never been a part. I had not become anything. I had only stopped pretending, and in that stopping, in that soft surrender, life revealed itself not as something I lived, but as something I was, not a self, not a seeker. Only the spacious, nameless now, without beginning, without end. Thank you for being here.